Thank you for joining me on today's Power BI webinar. Today we're going to run through some slides on Power BI. We're going to ask what Power BI is, discuss some of the features and capabilities of the product, look at some licensing and pricing, then move on to a demonstration of actually how Power BI works, how you kind of join all this up together. So the first question really is, what is Power BI? Well, Power BI is a cloud-based business analytics service. It's taking the technology that you would normally have on-prem, maybe kind of running on your desktop or running on a server where historically you would have generated reports in the past and put those up on a server and printed those reports out and hosting this information up in the cloud. The good thing with Power BI though is that it's more than just generating a SSRS report, for example, and just having that static visual information to look at on screen. With Power BI, the visualizations, the graphics, the information you present to the users is interactive. The great thing about this is that not only are you sort of servicing your users with the data they require, but if they then look at that data and they've got their own questions to ask of that information, actually ask their own questions of that data. So they've got tools in there that will allow them to filter the information, drill down into the data, and it's all a very, very kind of interactive experience. You see a dot on a map, you wonder what that dot is, well, you can click on it, and then Power BI can take it a little bit further again. What Power BI also gives you is it gives you a set of authoring tools as well that allow you to actually work on and build these reports in the first place. The area we'll end up looking at today will be kind of looking at the Power BI desktop application, looking at how we can get that information into your report, and then briefly looking at the kind of publishing side of it as well. The first thing to kind of look at is what is the kind of Power BI experience. So the kind of core application itself gives you a number of various services that you can kind of leverage. One of the first things that you can get are out-of-the-box SaaS content packs. These are pre-built templates that other users have created. You can kind of bring those into your own Power BI environment, and literally all you need to do is kind of point them at your data and then let them go away and start doing their business. For example, you could be interested in more analytics information coming out of Office 365. How are people using this environment? You can get yourself a SaaS content pack for this, point it at your Office 365 environment, and then start kind of surfacing those metrics. Microsoft obviously kind of built some of their own, but there are a lot of sort of third parties out there that have built their own SaaS content packs as well. But when you're first trying to get that sense of what Power BI can do, they're a good place to start looking. Other core features in Power BI then, you've got real-time dashboards and interactive dashboards. So as I said before, we're not just surfacing this information for users to sort of see what's going on screen. They can actually drill into that data and they can kind of interact with that information to kind of get their own answers out as well. Another really cool feature that is in Power BI and it is the natural query language. And very, very powerful feature. So a user, rather than needing to go off and learn skills like Transact SQL, they can interact with Power BI just using the English language and ask sentences that you would ask of a person of Power BI, and it will do its best to kind of return that data. Power BI is also very extensible. They're constantly improving the capability of this product. New visualizations are coming along, new capabilities are coming along. It's one of the things that kind of puts it quite high up on the sort of Gartner Magic Quadrant, and it is the fact that, constantly evolving, new features going in all the time. But the custom visualizations give you third-party extensions that other people have written. And again, a lot of these you can kind of use for free. Some you may require some other service to kind of get the full value out of. But it's a very good way of kind of saying, well, okay, I'm trying to generate this report in Power BI. I haven't got this particular style of chart or this way of interacting with my data. Go and have a look at the custom visualizations. There's loads out there. And of course, Power BI is part of Office 365, so you've got all that kind of native integration that kind of comes along with that. Sits in the 365 environment, ties into the 365 security groups, so you can control who has access to what, and integrates nicely with things like sort of Microsoft Teams as well, so you can kind of jump from your team, go into your Power BI report and surface information that just those users need to see. With Power BI as well then, it gets its data, well, really you've got kind of probably two main areas you're pulling data from. you can either pull data from the cloud, so that could be a website, it could be from Microsoft Azure, Amazon services, something else, or you can actually connect Power BI to on-premise data sources, and the classic for that will be something like SQL or Oracle. Incidentally, it doesn't mention it on this slide, but you can also import files directly into Power BI. So if you've got an Excel spreadsheet that's got a load of data in it and you want to do some clever stuff with that in Power BI, then you've got those capabilities. Once you've created your report or your visualization in Power BI, what you can then go on to do is then surface that information, make it available to your users. Well, as we mentioned before, Power BI has native Office 365 integration, so you can access Office 365 through the web browser, you can access Power BI through the web browser, all done through that sort of same experience, very, very kind of dialed in, which is nice. You can access Power BI on your mobile phone. For people on the move, out in the field, there's metrics you want to surface to them, engineering information maybe, they can access that information while they're on the move. There's a Power BI app you can download for your mobile phone, and when you're designing your Power BI reports, although most of your work will be in creating the desktop experience, there's then another step you can do to say, right, well now I've got that layout for the desktop experience, you can jiggle it around and produce a variation that kind of creates the mobile experience. It's a very, very interactive tool for users. Yes, you can create visualizations on screen. Yes, you can click on those visualizations and interact with the data within Power BI. But sometimes what users want to go on to do then is analyze that information and do more with it. And they may decide, right, well, that's really good info, but I'm going to drag that out into Excel. And Power BI gives you the ability to kind of export to Excel. You can control that. So if you don't want users doing it, you can turn that off. And really, probably the only other one to mention is that if you're into application development and you want to have Power BI reports that you can surface within your own application, then you've got Power BI embedded as well. Okay, so the desktop is where all the hard work really takes place. Using the Power BI desktop application is free to download, so whether or not you've got pro licensing or some other kind of licensing with Power BI, or you're not using it at all, if you've got an Office 365 account, download Power BI. It's just available for free to start messing around with the desktop application. As you kind of move up through the licensing, you'll still carry on working with the desktop app. It's still the same application. It's a very good place to get sort of started in the Power BI environment. Through the desktop application, you will bring your data in from whatever sources you're bringing it in from, so on-prem SQL Server maybe. What you'll do is your data transformation, that process of getting your data into a good shape for reporting, you'll do all that through the desktop authoring tool. As I mentioned before, obviously you can expand it with custom visualizations, and the work that Microsoft are doing on Power BI at the moment allows it to kind of actually integrate with other third-party packages as well. So for the data scientists in the room, the data analysts, if you're using R or using Python, then there is some integration there. So the Power BI product portfolio. So I mentioned that really kind of all the heavy lifting that you're going to end up doing, and most of the time that you spend working in Power BI, you'll be using the desktop application. So you'll author from there, you'll create your Power BI report, but then what you're going to want to do is make that Power BI report available to users. And so what you'll do is you'll publish it into the Power BI service. So when you're at that stage when you want to start making reports available to other users, then you're going to need to look at sort of licensing for it. But whether you're using the free copy or whether you've actually got the pro licensing, you can still publish up into the Power BI service. The only requirement there is that you have an Office 365 account and you can test the reports for yourself. But as soon as you want people to start interacting with those reports, effectively sharing them, you've got to buy licensing. For today, the main focus that we're going to look at is just the authoring side of Power BI, and we're going to take a bit of a journey into the Power BI service, but we'll touch that quite lightly today. The simplest licensing approach, and the one that the majority of users go for, is the kind of per user per month, and that works out at £7.50 per month for every user. So the question often get asked there is, well, I have to buy a license for the author, because obviously I'm creating the reports. Do the users have to have licenses as well, the users who are consuming these reports? And the answer is yes. For every user, whether you're just a consumer of the report, or whether you're the author of the report, when you're suddenly in this environment of sharing reports around, you've got to have pro licensing in place. However, Although I'll touch on these other licensing options briefly now, these are ones that users tend to go for or less likely to go for unless you're working in kind of large environments with your data. Power BI Premium. Suddenly you're jumping up to £3,766 per month. This scenario, you're no longer paying per user per license. It now doesn't matter how many users you've got in your environment. They can all access the Power BI Premium environment. And Power BI Premium is effectively the Power BI service, but it's kind of got a lot more kind of capability. It'll be things like, for example, if you're working with larger data sets, then you may find that you reach a limit with the Power BI service. So for most people, the Power BI Pro covers it, but if needs be, you can make that jump into the premium licensing. Other things that come with premium is the Power BI report server. So this is the ability to bring your Power BI report back on premise again and actually kind of service them through there. Probably the only other thing to mention with the Power BI Premium as well is that if you're starting to look a lot at the AI side of things with working with your data, there are tools and capabilities that Premium has that kind of services that requirement that you wouldn't just get in the sort of standard Power BI service. And just mentioning at the end, Power BI Embedded. Power BI Embedded was when you wanted to kind of include Power BI reports in your own applications. Last thing probably to mention here is if you've got Office 365 E5 licensing or Microsoft E5 licensing, the Power BI Pro license is already included with that, so you don't need to pay per month for your users. You may find you've already got it already. So where's your data coming from? Good things with Power BI. This is a growing list. As far as kind of pulling data into Power BI, you can pretty much pull it from anywhere. You can pull it from files, so Excel, CSV files tend to be kind of quite popular for that sort of thing. But more likely, you're going to be pulling it in from something like a SQL database or maybe a cloud service. So in here, we've got the obvious ones like sort of Microsoft SQL Server, integration, as you'd expect, with a lot of the Azure services. But what you can also do as well is you can integrate with online services as well. This list is a growing list, so chances are whatever you're seeing on this list now, they've probably added to it. How does Power BI work then? Bit of a high level overview from this slide. You've got the Power BI desktop application. You're going to be pulling your data in from whatever source you want to choose from. There's a series of steps you're going to want to go through once you've imported that data into Power BI. And the first stage is often the data transformation and cleansing step. This often can be where you end up doing quite a bit of work. I mean, often people imagine, well, I'm going to be in Power BI creating visualizations all day, but getting your data model right, getting your kind of business semantic model right, where the kind of logic of how your business works is kind of baked into the model, that's really important. And to get to that stage, getting your data into a good state is very important. The kind of things you might do within the data transformation and cleansing would be taking columns that have a name that's a bit cryptic in the actual SQL database and giving it a more meaningful name that users will understand. Because when they interact with your data later on, that can help them in a big way. A lot of work can go into the data transformation and cleansing step, but getting that model right is kind of key then for how your visualizations work later on. What you'll then do is you'll end up having possibly a number of tables in your Power BI report, and those tables can be linked together, a bit like with a relational database, and that's where you create your data model. And that data model then, once you've built it, if you wanted to, you could actually add new fields. Maybe you want to produce a sum of a certain column within the within your data, maybe like a rolling cumulative total or something. So you could put calculations in to do that. Maybe you want to summarize the data. Maybe you just want to produce totals by month. So again, using Power BI and calculations, you can achieve that. But once you've got the model in place, it then takes you into the final step, which is obviously creating your visualization and report. Once you've actually created your reports, the next step then is to get that data into the Power BI service, and so you will publish your report. Now, if you've got Pro licensing, then you're just going to publish it into the Power BI service. If you've got Premium licensing, then you may also have a Power BI report server on premise, and you can publish it to that as well. And then once the data is up there, once the visualization is up there, that can then be consumed by your users. But here's the trick. You've created this report on-premise. And you've probably, while you're writing this report, you were linking it to a local SQL database. So that's fine. You probably create the report. When you imported the data, you probably put the name of the server, you probably put some credentials in, create your report and publish it. How does Power BI know to get to that local on-premise server? But now you're up in the Power BI service, it's not going to find that service sitting out on the internet. Most of your data is going to be sort of hidden away inside your own environment. It needs a mechanism of kind of connecting back to that service. And this is where the Power BI Gateway comes in. The Power BI Gateway, effectively, any reports that you publish up into Power BI itself, what will then happen is it will use that gateway to sort of channel back through and connect to your on-premise server. The gateway itself is fairly easy to install. Once the gateway's there, future reports and everything can connect into that. There's the process of actually importing data into Power BI. All I just want to mention briefly here really is two ways that you can do that. And this doesn't really matter whether you're connecting to a SQL database file or it could be some other sort of service that you're trying to connect into. The normal way that you will try and import your data is actually to use the import feature. So effectively, when you create your report in the Power BI desktop, and then you go on to publish that report up into the Power BI service, what will happen then moving forward is that a copy of the data that you're querying will actually be stored in the Power BI service itself. So effectively, what we're seeing here is a report getting published up to the Power BI service, and you'll see a little box there talking about the imported data set. So effectively what this is showing is that it's using the on-premise gateway to store copies of that data. And remember, with Pro, that imported data set will get updated 8 times a day. Now, the good thing with this is that when it comes to users interacting with your dashboard, they're getting a much more snappy experience. They're not waiting for a whole load of data on-premise to get crunched, imported up into the cloud before they can see that visualization. Here, the other way that you can bring data in is using something called Direct Query. Now, the way Direct Query will work is, in this example, it's showing it pulling data from a SQL Azure database, but if it was on-prem, it would kind of pull it in via the Power BI gateway. But the way Direct Query works is that when you create your report, you author it through your desktop app, and then you publish it into the Power BI service. When the dashboard is called, what it will actually do is it will run a query against your on-premise data or wherever that data source happens to reside. So here it is pulling the data every time they run the visualization up into the cloud. Cautionaries here is, well, Direct Query is great because it will always give you instant and up-to-date data, but the big risk you have with this is performance. If you're pulling up hundreds of thousands of records and you're expecting a snappy visualization, just be wary. That's probably not the experience you're going to get. Okay, and really what we're just saying here with this slide about making your content performant, this is just really about making sure that you're producing a good visualization that works well for the users. Some points here then, limiting the number of visuals in a dashboard and report. 2 reasons. One, that if you overcrowd a screen and you're pulling data into lots and lots of different visualizations, you may just find that the screen becomes kind of difficult to kind of work with. Really, what you're going to also find with your users is that it's going to be a nightmare for them to kind of interpret that data. Putting custom visuals through their paces, this is just really saying, again, look at those third-party tools that you can access, third-party visualizations. There's things out there that just extend the capability of Power BI. Set and save filters in reports. Maybe I've got the visualization I've created that's got a load of sales information in there, and I'm looking at all the sales data from now to the beginning of time, and I've got some nice flashy charts that are showing, what sold in what month, where it got sold, and providing some filters and stuff for users to actually work through that data. Well, that's great. You've got all that data going back through to the beginning of time, but actually a lot of people going into a report may only be interested in what happened last month. How did we get on? What did we sell? And so rather than having to make a user kind of set all the filters just so it's showing the most recent month, what you can do instead is you can set the filters up when you're designing your Power BI report in the authoring tool, and then save those filters with the reports. So the first time the user hits your report, they'll see data just for the current month, but if they want to, then they can kind of slide back further. Limiting complicated measures and aggregate data and models, the authoring tool is very powerful. It does allow you to summarize and aggregate data, and that's fine. It's just a question of whether or not you end up sort of going completely mad with it and having like loads and loads of tables, loads and loads of kind of aggregate formulas and things. And then what happens is that you come along later on and you want to make changes to it, and that can get quite fiddly. And the other thing it just mentions here is just performing load testing. This is just really making sure that you've got that snappy visual, that when users go into your Power BI report, that it's loading quickly. I think it's now time just to have a look at a demo then of Power BI. Illustration, I'm going to use data from the US Geographic Service. It's a website you can go to, and one of the things that they provide on that website is they provide a RESTful web service where they provide a feed of all earthquake data. So it's just an interesting example to have a look at, just to see how we can pull this data into Power BI and introduce you to some of the kind of transformation and cleansing techniques. This is just one of the URLs you can put in, and this is pulling back my earthquake feed, and just straight off the bat that you can stare at that sort of data and think, well, where do you even begin? Quite often RESTful services are designed for kind of applications to develop, connect to, not users. So the data structure is not there to be kind of laid out so that it's easy for users to read, but it's great for applications when they want to interact with it. Just to show the data in a slightly better format, let's just go into Notepad++. What we can see here is that same data. I've just copied a section of it in just to give you a better sort of sense of the layout. What we're seeing here are name paired values. There'll be a name followed by a value. Looking in here, you can get a bit of a sense of the kind of structure we're dealing with. So just some things to highlight here, I suppose, is if we look at some of the, or look at any of the kind of name values, things like mag, place, TZ, MMI, CDI, you've got some names in there that are going to be hard for users to necessarily understand or digest. So what we can do is when we bring the data into Power BI, we're probably going to want to tidy up some of our column names. Some other things to look at are, if you look at the highlighted row, the tsunami, I mentioned earlier about yes, no fields in databases often being represented as zeros and ones. Well, you've got a good example of it there. When users come to seeing that data, we're probably going to want that to show as a yes, no field. And then other things like null values, I might want to look at those and start changing some of those over to zeros instead of nulls. Let's get the data into Power BI. Here I am in Power BI Desktop. The data has already been imported in. What I would have done is just pulled that data in from a new source up here. And as you can see, there's only a short list. You can see there's web, so that's how I got my JSON data in. But hit more, and then there's a whole range of data sources that we could connect to. There we go. And as you can see, it's that same list I showed you before, but the chances are that there's things in here that aren't on that list before. Power BI, again, is a constantly evolving product. I'm bringing in my earthquake data. If you look on the right, you can see a load of steps that have taken place. These are all the things that I've done to transform this data, but let's just take it right back to the start. That's one of the nice things that you can do here, is the steps, once you've done them, aren't baked in. You can go back to steps, modify them, change things, and make any tweaks you need to make to them. So let's go back to the source steps. That would have been the step created when I first imported my data. And as you can see, when you first bring that JSON list in, it looks pretty just, well, what's going on there? All the data seems to have disappeared. And this is because you've got tables within tables, relational stuff going on within the data. And so really all you're seeing here is a very, very top level. But using the transformation tools in Power BI, I can slowly work the data. So these are steps I've all created myself and started to put a data structure in place. And slowly but surely, as I work through the transformation process, you can start seeing the data emerging. But look at this stage, you know, column names aren't necessarily friendly at this stage, so we'll need to do some work on that. Getting values out. So if we work down a little bit further down, let's see what's going on here. Taking some columns out that I don't need anymore. Let's get down to here. Renamed columns now, so they've got more meaningful names. But again, look, tsunami risk, that's got a load of zeros in there. So one of these last steps will go through. Oh, there we go. It's taken all the no's. So all the zeros and turned it into no's. Taken the ones, converted it to yeses. And so I go through this process of data transformation and I create my data set in Power BI. And so this stage you'll go through, you'll probably need to do with most data. However, if you want to, you can pre-clean the data. So if you're querying it from, say, a SQL server, your Transact SQL could be doing actually some of these data transformation steps. It doesn't all have to be done in Power BI, but it can be. If you're pulling from an Excel spreadsheet, again, you may want to tidy up the data there instead, so that what you're bringing into Power BI is a lot neater. It's up to you. But the transformation tools are there, and you will be using them, I suspect, to some degree. Okay, so we've imported our data into Power BI. Let me just come out of that screen for a second. And what you'll end up building. Okay, so the data model looks like this, and actually this is showing just a couple of data. It's actually the same data. I've imported it twice in this particular demo, but what it shows is really that you can start bringing tables and data into your Power BI, and you can start creating relationships with that data. And look here, we've got a good, nice, tidy names in our columns, and even the tables have nice names. And that again is all important when you're creating visualizations, but also especially important when you're doing the actual natural query language side of Power BI. So what does it look like? So here's a Power BI report taking the data that we use out of the USGS service, and what we can see here is I've taken like latitude and longitude information that was in my data set, and I'm able to map it, so you can see where it's going on in the world. A little chart showing the magnitudes, and also a bit of detail down below. But one of the things I mentioned earlier with Power BI is this data is interactive. So this would be, if you were producing a report and it was just a static report, this might be as far as users are able to go, and they may be able to sort of scroll through the list and see what's going on. But here, what we can do is think, well, this big circle down here, what's this all about? Click on it, and then suddenly all the visualizations get tweaked to filter down on that piece of information. And so what it does is it doesn't actually hide the data completely, but it enables you to highlight particular rows or particular bits of information. Depends on what the visualization is designed to do. So like I say, over here with the magnitude one, when I click on it, let's try that one, you can see in the bar it just fades it out, but when I come over here in the bar and click on that, you can see actually on the map it filters it out, and that's just down to how the visualization is designed to work. Or it could be I'm looking at my table of data and think, well, okay, where's this one going on? Give that a click, and then suddenly I know exactly where things are happening. So it's this interactive user experience. As I mentioned before, you can export data. So a user, if they want, could export that data off to Excel if they wanted. And also on here, we've got the filters. And again, coming back to that slide we mentioned earlier about making your reports performant and saving the filters, here it only filters the last few days. But if I wanted to, maybe we could go back further in time and see earthquakes over a bigger period. And the tsunami risk, that 0-1 field, now we could filter down on tsunami risks. Maybe let's just look at the ones where there is a tsunami risk. And again, filtering down on my data, it's very useful. Okay, so again, keeping it simple. I haven't put loads and loads of visualizations in. It's a strong temptation, just try and resist that if you can. But as I mentioned before, if you need to present lots of information, you can create various tabs. So I've got the Ask the Question one. This is an example of natural query language. So here I've got one already in. And again, this is where the name conventions of columns becomes important to help it interpret what's going to come out into that report. But yeah, let's see. Let's change that. Oops. Click in there. Okay, something else then. So share count of quake by magnitude. And there you go. Depending on the question you're answering, Power BI will try and decide the best visualization to kind of give you for that. So when you're using the natural query language, sometimes the data will come out as tabular, sometimes it will come out as charts, sometimes it can be a pie chart. It's purely down to the question being asked, and Power BI will make its kind of best attempt to kind of work out how to show that information to you. So what we've seen here today then is we've started looking at Power BI, what we can do with that. We've created our report within Power BI. We've done that following kind of a step of kind of pulling the data in, and then making that report available to users online. In summary then, today we've just had a brief overview of Power BI itself. We've kind of discussed kind of what Power BI is, looked at sort of some of its capabilities, discussed some of the licensing side of things, and then really we've kind of moved on to see how we can bring that data into Power BI. So you've seen an example there of how data got imported in. Once you've got that data imported into Power BI, then you'll kind of cleanse and transform that data. You'll create your data model, your business semantic model, and then once that data model is actually created, move on to create the actual visualizations itself. And obviously, when you get to this stage of creating visualizations, you're kind of onto the fun bit. But there is a little bit of work that kind of takes you to, that you need to do to get yourself to this stage. Hopefully, you've found that useful today. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And yes, goodbye.